It is inevitable that the changing climate will in one way or another affect each and every one of us. Rising temperatures, change in precipitation patterns, extreme weather, melting ice caps, and rising sea levels are overall changes to the climate of the Earth and are a direct result of human action. The general issue of climate change is a highly important and well-justified cause to fight for. However, when you delve deeper into who is on the receiving end of the direct impacts of issues such as pollution and misuse of land, one must first understand the issue of environmental racism. By definition, environmental racism is racial discrimination in the development and implementation of environmental policy, especially as manifested in the concentration of hazardous waste disposal sites in or near areas with a relatively large ethnic minority population. Issues of population and misuse of land disproportionately affect people of color and low-income socioeconomic status. Environmental issues and issues of race and class are not mutually exclusive. Rather, they are intersectional issues. Race and class must be present in the discussion of environmental issues in order for a regulation or policy to have any kind of ability to implement widespread change. In recent years, the environmental justice movement has become more and more popular as a response to the issue of environmental racism. Environmental policy has quickly become a partisan issue. The choices of the current administration to loosen regulation on industry is in and of itself an example of environmental racism. As mentioned previously, people of color are far more likely to live in areas where unregulated industry will affect them. With this in mind, it is clear that regulation and policy, or the lack thereof, reflects who is in power, not those who it should protect. Environmental racism has a long history in the United States. Roughly 56% of the 9 million Americans that live within 3 kilometers of commercial hazardous waste facilities are people of color. De facto segregation has historically pushed blacks into these areas of the country. During the Great Migration, nearly 5 million African Americans migrated from the South to industrial urban areas throughout the country. Upon arrival, they were nearly always met with harassment and violence by white people already living in the areas, and as a result, often forced to live in areas surrounding dangerous and potentially highly toxic industrial sites. An example of this is seen in North Richmond, California, a neighborhood located at the north end of the Bay Area. People of color make up 97% of the population there. The neighborhood is within miles of the Chevron oil refinery, which allows residents to be exposed to hazardous pollutants such as benzene and mercury. The Chevron oil refinery is the main polluter in North Richmond, but there are also 2 other major oil refineries that regularly release toxic chemicals and heavy metals into the air. The refinery has reportedly released 575,669 pounds of chemicals into the air, water, and waste facilities in the year of 2010, within the surrounding area of North Richmond alone. There are a total of 5 oil refineries in the area of North Richmond, as well as the companies General Chemicals West and Airgas Dry Ice, which are also all major contributors to air pollution in the North Richmond area alongside the Chevron oil refinery. Unfortunately, air pollution is not the only problem in North Richmond. On the abandoned site of One Superfund, a former pesticide distributor, DDT and other pesticides continue to leach their way into the city's harbor, where many of its residents fish for food. According to the Scientific American, the pollutants are so prevalent that the levels found outside in the air are nearly as high in people's homes. The pollution is inescapable. Public schools in North Richmond practice chemical disaster drills alongside earthquake drills. 2 of North Richmond's public schools are located within 1 mile of the Chevron refinery. The original settlers of the area were mainly black residents moving north in the general direction of northwest to escape lynchings and Jim Crow and searching for economic opportunities in urban areas during the Great Migration. In the following years, a large population of Latinos and Southeast Asians also moved into the neighborhood because they too could not afford to live in any other neighborhood in the greater Richmond area and as a result were forced there, but not by choice. The toxic environment is inescapable for most of New Richmond's residents. In terms of solution to the pollution problem in North Richmond, California, little to no policies have been implemented to prevent such pollution damage. It has been proposed that North Richmond become annexed into the city of Richmond, which could potentially grant the citizens more access to public safety. However, this would increase property taxes in the area, which many of New Richmond's residents cannot afford. No policies have been made to actually protect North Richmond citizens and their health. Only small regulations have placed a cap on certain emissions that Chevron produces, but still allows other toxins to continue to pollute the air. The pollution that occurs here has affected the health and safety of multiple generations and has disproportionately affected people of color in the area. Another well-known case of environmental racism is the Flint water crisis that occurred in Flint, Michigan. Flint is a majority black city that was also populated during the Great Migration. Around 40% of its residents live in poverty. In 2012, the local government in Flint decided to switch their city water supply from Detroit City Water to water from the Flint River via a pipeline built by the city as a means of cutting costs. The city failed to treat the new pipes in order to prevent corrosion, and as a result of this, lead began to leach into the water supply and continued to do so until September of that year. Researchers from Virginia Tech University began to test hundreds of homes and found extremely high levels of lead. Earlier in the year, the same researchers sampled a single home and found lead levels at 13,200 ppb. Water is considered hazardous waste at 5,000 ppb. Lead poisoning is especially damaging to children and pregnant women. The same researchers later found lead deposits in the bones of children living in the area. At first, when the evidence was brought forth that state officials and local Flint government had knowingly poisoned the city's water supply, it was thoroughly denied. Several months later, when a state of emergency was declared by President Obama, many of the Flint and Michigan state officials came forward and eventually resigned. The crisis is still very much ongoing. Flint city water is considered toxic. The Environmental Protection Agency has declared that the water is unsafe via the standards of the Safe Drinking Water Act, but has done little to nothing to create any new legislation that will prevent future crises or in general fix the situation in Flint. Some amounts of privately donated money have come to aid in Flint, but lawmakers remain quiet on the issue. Much of the damage done is irreparable and will have lasting effects on the citizens of Flint. In recent years, the hog farming industry in the Carolinas has shown a disproportionate impact on African Americans, Hispanics, and Native Americans. These demographics often live near these industrial farms throughout the Carolinas. The waste produced from the farms can be highly toxic and has caused major problems with both air and water pollution. The waste from these industrial pig farms is stored in massive cesspools that contain feces, blood, urine, and other bodily fluids. There are roughly 3,300 of these across the state. Before the cesspool is full, its contents are turned into a sort of fertilizer and sprayed across the surrounding fields. On top of an unbearable smell that plagues local residents, the waste liquid contaminates surrounding residents' private property. Farmers allow dead boxes or boxes filled with rotting pigs to drift about, which have often also been found on local residents' property. Research has shown that there is a direct link between the waste from pig farming and higher rates of nausea, increases in blood pressure, respiratory issues such as wheezing, and increased asthma symptoms for children, and overall diminished quality of life for people living nearby. In the areas surrounding the pig farms, life expectancy remains low even after adjusting for socioeconomic factors. After the recent Hurricane Florence, the problems with the cesspool contamination have only worsened. At least 110 cesspools have overflown and leached into the surrounding environments. Again, like the other two situations I mentioned, the issue of environmental pollution is disproportionately affecting African Americans and other people of color. In all three cases of environmental racism, Black citizens have been affected by pollution at unwarranted rates. As the issues have come to light in the media and in general become more mainstream issues, the environmental justice movement has become increasingly popular. The environmental justice movement builds upon the philosophy and work of environmentalism by stressing the manner in which adversely impacting the environment in turn adversely impacts the population of that environment, and recognizes that at the heart of environmental justice there are issues of racism and socioeconomic injustice. The situations in all of these areas cast light on the problems with current environmental policies in the United States. In general, these policies are not implemented in such a way that protects all people, and instead favors issues that generally concern people who already have access to clean water, air, and other basic human rights. As the environmental movement progresses, it is important to recognize that people of color, people living in poverty, and those that do not have a voice have to be a part of the conversation. The health of poor minority communities cannot continue to be overlooked.